Years ago, probably about 5, 6 years ago now, I wrote in my book, Fallacy of the Calorie, dietary cholesterol has nothing to do with your blood lipid levels. That's what the data showed. And from a lot of my peers, I caught a lot of grief about that. Still do. Yet, just a few years ago, the government got rid of the daily requirement in terms of cholesterol because they said there's no data. And yet, you still have professional organizations saying don't eat egg yolks because they have tons of cholesterol, and people, you should just have an egg white omelet, or worse, a synthetic egg with God knows what it's made from.
Hey, welcome to Unlatched Mind. My guest today is Dr. Michael Fenster, aka Chef Dr. Mike. Dr. Fenster is a board-certified cardiologist, professor of culinary medicine, and a professional chef. Dr. Mike had written an article titled "Why the War Against Red Meat is a Red Herring," and so we framed the discussion around that. But we went, we circled around all things cholesterol and the egg white omelet debacle, and hey, spoiler alert, eat the whole egg. It's fine. Anyway, Dr. Mike has some really good insights, and he's obviously super qualified to have some of the opinions he has, and he has the data to back it up. So anyway, let's just jump in. I give you Chef Dr. Mike. Well, let's kick it off. Dr. Fenster, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Vinny. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So your article, why the war, why the war against red meat is a red herring, right? I saw that. I'm like, okay, yep. I've always been, I don't know. You never know what ground truth is with food and nutrition. I feel like we're still figuring it all out. And but before we jump into that, because I think I agree with you on most topics, on most of this,
Okay.
like wholeheartedly agree. And so it's not going to be much of a
Then
debate.
you, my friend, are a rebel.
Really? Oh, well, there might be
Oh, yeah.
there might be something in your writing that I missed then. That's controversial, but it seemed common sense to me. But we'll dig into that. But before we do, maybe who are you? What do you do? And a little background
Sure.
on yourself, maybe.
Uh, uh, Go by Chef Dr. Mike because I'm both a chef and a physician. So I'm an interventional cardiologist, board certified. And for folks that don't know what that means, when people have a heart attack, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm the guy they call. I go in, put stents in, that sort of things, fix coronary arteries. Also, before I ever even went to medical school, uh, I learned to cook professionally. I started as a dishwasher to help pay my way through college, worked my way up through the ranks back in the dark days before the internet, before there were celebrity chefs, and nobody wanted to do the job because
Right.
all your buddies were going out at Friday and Saturday. And, by the time you finished at 2 a.m. smelling like dirty dishwater, nobody really had much use for you. So
Right.
those two passions of food and health have really kind of defined my life. I've got personal reasons for discovering the path to culinary medicine. I had my own challenges with joints, which really stem from being a much worse athlete than I thought I was in my teens. When I went in, did sports, broke bones, tore ligaments, tendons, etc. And you pay for those down the road a little bit.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
a large part of that was my diet. As a professional chef, I've since gone back, got my culinary degree in gourmet cooking and catering.
Oh,
But as
neat.
somebody who knows food, who grew up with great food,
Yeah.
you know, medicine can be pretty demanding as an intern and as a resident, particularly back in the day before they even limited hours. And so I got away from my roots, and turned out
Right.
that a large part of my suffering, my challenges were self-inflicted. Bad dietary choices. So I empathize with everyone out there that's confronted with this. This is my life. This is my passion, and I can tell you it's hard for me to sort through the data.
Yeah.
So, my goal, the way I see it, I'm here to be a resource. I'll give you the information, share it with you, what I know, what's my opinion, what the studies show. And, it's up to everybody to have their own individual relationship with
Yeah.
food.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you hear that old cliche, food is either a poison or a cure, depending on what you put in your body. And I mean, you only really the only thing we ingest is food, right? So I mean, food and drug, it's all nutrition. It all breaks down biochemically to this, to various things. So it's either you're putting things that are in line with what your body needs or not. I think everyone would agree with that. It's just that what is and what's not okay is, I guess, the constant debate.
I'm going to take you one step further, Vinny. We're going to
Sure.
shatter some myths right out of the box.
Yeah.
Everything you said, absolutely 100% correct. I agree with that. But I think what we're really learning on the edge of science is it's even more than that. So, for example, when we look at things like the Harvard Happiness Study, we find out what is it? It's a simple question. So, what do we have to do in our life to live the longest, be happy, have wellness for the best
Yeah.
part of our life? Is it our cholesterol level? Is it how much money we make? Is it our socioeconomic class? Turns out, according to the Harvard Happiness Study, that it's relationships, but it's the quality of those relationships.
Yeah.
Similar data from the Dan Buettner and his group out of National Geographic with the Blue Zones. And so when we look at food, for me, food is an experience. It's social currency. Food is processed in the same area of the brain as sex. So to say that love and relationships we have with those important people around us is simply based on biochemical urgings to reproduce or so on and so forth, I think really misses the human experience, which we know contributes to the richness of our life. And for me, and I think the data is starting to support this, we're looking at things like functional MRI, structural MRI studies, etc., that our relationship with food is one of those critical relationships. So in culinary medicine, as we teach it at the University of Montana, as I do, it's one step beyond that nutrition. And I want to get, and I think that's important because I want to get out of that box food is medicine. It's all about the calories. Man, it's all about you, Vinny. It's all about your experience, your relationship with food. That's the template.
Well, you're certainly onto something. No, you're certainly onto something because I mean, okay, I'm Italian, right? I check most of the Italian stereotypes, like quite literally. We after we stop recording, I'll tell you some details. But food has been such a huge part of our life. I mean, it's just growing up, and so you're at breakfast. We're talking about what's for lunch. We're at lunch, talking about what's for dinner. Dinner, we're going to go whose house we're going to go. My family was going to go to someone's house for coffee and dessert, and it's such a social. My grandmother, they've all passed now, but when I was a kid, if I didn't eat for some reason, it was not like, oh, he's just not hungry. It was a blow. You could see her heart breaking. It's like, what, so there is such a social element and such a, it really is part of the human experience. I mean, 100%. And if you even a lot of the diets, and there's diet 1, diet 2, there's all these diets out there, and there's like these Noom apps and other apps now that are trying to help people with, and they may be, I don't know if they're worth it or they don't work, but they, at least they're trying to add the psychology of what is the relationship to food doing. Like they're adding that other layer. So, I think you're onto something for sure. I mean, I can't imagine that's controversial. Some people I think just, eat just to live. I'm kind of a live to eat person. Like I love everything about it. So I think you're onto something for sure.
Well, I think so. What's interesting is, from the medical field, though, we tend to really focus on things that we can put numbers on, like calories or percent RDAs, things that we can measure. And for so long, we even separated out, right? There's mental health, then there's physical health, as if the two weren't connected. And yet, what we know now, I mean, everybody's heard of the placebo effect, right? That means about, roughly give or take, 30% of people heal themselves with the power of their mind and their belief. Now, that's pretty impressive. Yet we kind of dismiss that out of hand. So I think there is some movement in medicine, Western medicine I'm talking about now, because obviously kind of a more holistic approach. Eastern medicine's done that since existence, but there's sort of a coming back together now and understanding that, for example, I'm a cardiologist. People hear all about cholesterol levels from cardiologists. People don't hear about depression, which is as a potent risk factor for having a heart attack as any cholesterol level. But as a cardiologist, I never write a prescription for like, Vinny, go out, do something, be happy today. But it turns out that's incredibly important.
Right. Go do some exercise and have a meaningful conversation with somebody, which would every study would show increases your mental your mental state. Yeah. Interesting. First of all, I guess the title of the article, like I said earlier, is it will kind of frame the conversation around that, and we'll see where it goes. But why the war against red meat is a red herring. What before we jump into it, what prompted you to write that? Was it just as part of some of the research you were doing, or?
Well, the research I have done, and I see things like this, quite often. Again, it's almost a parallel for me in terms of the salt argument. You've probably heard, oh, Americans have to cut down their salt. We've got to get salt out of the diet, so on and so forth. But and people can read my articles on in the Atlantic online and Pacific Standard and other places. The data really hasn't changed. But what we come to find, and this is by many professors and other experts, is that taking salt out of our food only makes us miserable. So decreasing dietary sodium doesn't have inputs. In fact, there's an article, one of my latest articles on Psychology Today looks at that because of a particular study that was done looking at the beneficial effects for certain patients with increasing salt in their diet. And so, part of what frustrates me is, I love food. I'm a chef.
Yeah.
And to hear kind of these sound bites that are full of misinformation or misdirection where red meat's bad. Let's look at that a little bit more closely. Let's find out, what's really going on here. Is that really what the information says, or is it maybe telling us something else, or is it directing us, to look a little more closely in other areas, leading to new hypotheses and discoveries. So I find it, that's just kind of one of my missions, and it doesn't make me popular. Years ago, probably about 5-6 years ago now, I wrote in my book, Fallacy of the Calorie, dietary cholesterol has nothing to do with your blood lipid levels. That's what the data showed. And from a lot of my peers, that's I caught a lot of grief about that. Still do. Yet, just a few years ago, the government got rid of the daily requirement in terms of cholesterol because they said there's no data. And yet you still have professional organizations saying don't eat egg yolks because they have tons of cholesterol, and you should just have an egg white omelet, or worse, a synthetic egg with God knows what it's made from. And we're finding out that that's probably worse than anything. So
didn't we learn this from the whole margarine thing? I feel like we should have learned this from the don't eat butter, eat margarine. Really? I mean, It's amazing that that's still going on, and that theme. Now, I'm a layman. I'm not in the medical field at all. I'm just curious about all this stuff, and I consume a ton of podcasts, a ton of audiobooks, and just read stuff. And I thought that whole egg white omelet thing, I almost thought like we were all like, oh man, we really screwed up there, and telling people to eat egg white omelets. I thought that was common knowledge now that the wholesome nutrition's in the whole egg, and consuming cholesterol is not going to give you base bloodline high cholesterol. And is that true? I mean, I think that I think that's true.
You're exactly right. And yet, there are careers that have been built on that.
Incentives,
Well, you still shouldn't eat so many eggs, blah, blah, blah. They don't even give you a reason. Maybe they don't even give you a reason why. But there are professional organizations that do that. I was traveling not too long ago, and they're on the menu at a restaurant. Have a heart-healthy egg white omelet. So, it gets out there, it gets in the mainstream. Maybe the science wasn't very good 50 years ago when some of these recommendations came out, but it's just been repeated so long, everybody buys into it. And, so that's why, that's one of the things that I do. I'm here to say, well, here are the facts. Now, if you don't like eggs, if you're Guy Fieri, he hates eggs. He's not worried about his cholesterol, at least as far as I know. I'm not his personal physician. But he's like, I don't like to eat eggs. Great. Well, don't eat eggs. But if you're telling me, hey, don't eat eggs because they're bad for you from a health perspective, then I would take issue with that statement.
Right.
And
the data,
that's the kind of information I'm here to provide.
Sure. I mean, you're a scientist. I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm a scientist. Show me the data. Let's talk about it and not let it get. I mean, incentives are everywhere, right? If you follow the rainbow of when any organization or any movement is taking a position, you follow that rainbow. That at the end of it's a pot of incentive, and that pot of incentive is money. So it's an unfortunate reality. So you always have to be kind of okay. Well, where are you getting this, and why is there? So the article. You kind of touch on three. At first, when I read it, I was thinking, okay, it was going to be strictly about the health, whether or not eating red meat is healthy or unhealthy. and you break down. I think you kind of really took you broke it down into kind of three components. The kind of sustainability / climate change aspect of eating red meat, eating beef, cows, the cattle industry. The actual health aspect is consuming it healthy or not, and then the ethical consideration. So I feel like if we could, because most of the article was on the sustainability piece. I mean, where would you rather focus? I'm mostly interested in the health side, but we can kind of go anywhere. You want to maybe start with the health side?
Yeah, well, no, I'm happy to discuss any of that.
Okay.
And first and foremost, I want to say again, I'm not here to change somebody's opinion or even really change a diet. Just put the information out there.
Sure.
A
Yeah.
ton of my
Let them make the
friends,
decision.
my best friends are vegetarians and vegans, and we get along just fine.
Sure. Yeah.
And I respect them. And for a lot of them, that choice is an ethical choice. And that's not something I'm here to argue because that's a personal, belief.
Right.
And
Right.
and you do what's right, and everybody, regardless, should do what's right for them. So
Right.
I
Right.
think that piece is self-explanatory and off the table.
That's personal, right? Yep. Yep.
And however you want to talk about the other two, I'm happy to talk about both. I focused a little bit more on the climate change for the article purposes. Because I've written so much about the health aspects
Okay,
that we
right.
can get into, and this is a little bit different. And to my eye, it was as if people were trying to use a health argument which failed and kind of put a fresh coat of paint on it and sell it to you as well. You didn't believe that if you ate red meat you were going to die. That hasn't really worked so well. So I'm going to get you to stop eating red meat because now you got to save the planet.
Yeah.
And
The
that's-
conflation of
so
the
I explored that
right.
a little more deeply.
Yeah, yeah, and I like that's. I think I had sent in the notes I had sent you. I like that you broke down the three kind of components of it because very often, which you just kind of articulated, very often those three key components, while separate, people conflate them. And,
Yes.
and I have the same kind of perspective you do. If someone's like, "Oh, I don't eat red meat; it's unhealthy," I'm like, "Well, okay. Well, do you really know that? Where's the data? Are you eating McDonald's cheeseburgers, quote unquote, red meat, or are you eating grass-fed, natural? Big difference." And we'll get into that. But
Yes.
or if someone says, "Look, I don't like factory farming. I don't like the way the animals are treated," Roger that. I mean, who can argue that, right? I mean, I'm not typically one of those people that gets into a lot of that stuff. At least I haven't. But the more I look into it, I find the factory farming thing and what we put those animals through is despicable, to be honest. I would love to be able, if I had the resources and the time, and people say, well, you just got to make the time. But I would love to just hunt my own food, kill it ethically, and just feed my family like that. I wish, I think that would be an amazing thing. But, because I just, so that one aspect, I totally agree with you. But so in terms of the health thing, I mean, let's just start off. Fresh red meat, is it healthy or unhealthy? From your perspective, from the data you know.
And I'm going to go back to what you just touched on, Vinny, because I think
Sure.
that does make a difference. So how we raise our animals, the animal husbandry act of this, I think is critically important. And I'm like you, I'm not a fan of CAFOs, we call them, or concentrated animal feeding operations, or anywhere the animals are, in my opinion, mistreated.
Yeah.
As a chef, as somebody who in the past has hunted their own food, I remember a story. It's one of the first times I ever gone out hunting. I didn't learn to hunt until I was in my 20s. With my ex-wife and her in-laws who owned a lot of farmland in Virginia, and we'd go out and hunt venison, every fall. And it was really interesting to me kind of talking to the old timers, right, who really knew the ways of the woods and had kind of grown up on that. And you're like, well, Mike, you got to learn to take that deer down with one shot, because if you shoot it and the animal is stressed and runs, even if it's 100, 50 yards before it drops, the meat's going to be off.
Yeah,
It's like,
got
wow,
about a whole
that's really interesting.
adrenaline and whatnot running through the
It changes the character. Now imagine an animal spending its entire life stressed like that. You know what it does to us? It gives us diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancers,
Exactly.
etc. So it's to me it's not the best tasting food from a chef sort of selfish perspective. To just ethically, like you, I have a problem with mistreating. Part of what we do in culinary medicine is understanding, again, tying back in those mental aspects. And we know that mindfulness combined with eating, so how we eat, totally apart from what we eat, but how we eat, can affect our health, our personal health. So introducing what I call an attitude of gratitude, where I try to make sure at each meal I stop, whether it's 30 seconds or 3 minutes, and be thankful for whether it's a plant, an animal, a fungus, whatever, that has sacrificed its life to be on my plate today. And all the
Yeah.
people who work to bring it to me, we can actually show and have shown those are actually called MB Eats in the literature, or mind-based eating awareness techniques or therapies, and they've been shown to actually measurably lower markers of inflammation and things like that. So we
Wow.
change our own body state from this kind of crazy American Western civilization hyperdrive. We bring it down a notch, and we allow our parasympathetic, our healing aspects to come forth, and it manifests in measurable ways to us. So, the first thing I want to do is look at how that animal is raised. If I can't get something wild that you're talking about, even if it's wild, I want to know, how is it, taken down, how is it processed, etc. And animals. This has been shown in some studies, for example, when animals are fed what is not their natural diet. So many people think cows eat corn. Cows are ruminants, so
No.
their natural diet is grass.
Grass,
It's
yeah.
not a natural diet of corn. It's a different grain for them. Um, when they're fed things like GMO corn, which can contain levels of herbicides, etc., particularly Roundup or glyphosate,
Yeah.
those things can affect their gut bacteria and actually make the animals essentially sick. And they can do the same
Yeah.
thing. Same thing that we're learning can happen to us. So I'm very particular if I'm going to eat meat or I'm going to get a farm fish. How is that raised? And as you said, it can take a little bit of work, but
Yeah.
I've identified sources, and part of what we teach in a course, we call it the culinary medicine art of sorcery, and it's about paying attention to I asked three questions. How is it bred? So is this a GMO farmed Atlantic salmon, or is it a wild Alaskan salmon? What was it fed? So is this corn that was raised organically, or is it GMO corn that's been treated with tons and tons of herbicides, etc.? And finally, where was it led? So was there any post processing that went on? If so, what did that
Yeah.
involve? So I always ask those three questions, particularly when I'm sourcing some new ingredients. And when I answer those in the way that I like, then yeah, that would be my serving of fresh, red meat. Having said that, when we look at some of the data from things like study was now done almost over 10 years ago by Micha, Micha, I believe, et al. Out of Harvard, where they did a meta-analysis looking over 1.2 million people worldwide. What they found, and this is a landmark study in my opinion, because it was one of the first studies to say, well, there's red meat and there's red meat, right? There's processed, like you said, burgers and sausages with tons of additives, and then there's a steak. And
Right.
is there a difference between these two? And what they found is that when you ate 4 ounces of fresh red meat, so you just made a hamburger patty at home,
Yeah.
or put a steak on the grill, something like that, you didn't increase your risk of heart disease, you didn't increase your risk of diabetes, etc. But if you ate just 2 ounces per day on average of highly processed things, so you stopped at the drive-through, got that super processed patty, you increased your risk of heart disease by over 40% and your risk of diabetes by almost 20%. And I think a study like that with those powerful numbers, other studies have shown the same sorts of things. And so we have to be very wary because of the reasons you said. When a new study comes out and says red meat is bad, it's like, okay, which red meat are you talking about? There's a lot of
Yeah.
red meats.
Right. Yeah. Are these epidemiological studies or?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well, some.
there's yeah, it's because one thing I was reading about and heard, and again, I always wonder where ground truth is on this stuff, but a lot of the proponents of exactly what you're saying is saying, well, a lot of these studies saying red meat is bad are from epidemiological studies. I've told myself I will not say that word too many times, but I think I nailed it twice. No, but
You did. Yeah,
you know,
it's awesome.
is where they ask folks, hey, how many days a week do you eat red meat? And
Yeah.
that was where the question ended. So people going to the drive-through at McDonald's would be weighed the same way folks that would maybe, I don't know, kill a bison in their backyard in Montana and and eat it and feed their fish, and freeze it and eat it. So there was no difference there. So it's like kind of like, well, and those folks eating McDonald's are also much more likely to be sedentary, much more likely to have bad habits, much more likely to be obese. So it's like, okay, those studies in and of themselves can't fully, stand on their own, without other data. So,
I think that's true. There's a lot of difficulty in doing any kind of those analysis, and there are very few studies, unfortunately, looking at the questions I just brought up, which is if we're getting something that's pastured, free ranged, raised humanely, which usually means that it's more expensive because they're keeping it on the farm longer instead of from the time the animal is born, 9 months, and they're cutting steaks off it. Those animals are bred, pigs especially, for example. They live in a cage and they're just made to gain weight, get fat, grow quickly,
food,
versus heritage breeds, which are often grown or raised, I should say, for flavor. And they take, 2, sometimes 3 times as long to mature. So as a chef and somebody who's going to take the time to enjoy the food, I'm always about that flavor first. So, one of the things I say is, well, maybe I don't eat as much beef. I don't need a 48-ounce porterhouse.
That's right.
But, 6 ounces of something that's really good that I'm going to take my time and enjoy and experience, get into that food experience, enjoy it, taste it.
Right. Actually taste it, have a sip of that red wine and just let it all swizzle in that. Yeah. Not just wolf
so
it down.
It becomes cost effective that way. Yeah. Exactly. You got it.
Yeah. No, it's, I mean, yeah, I'm a pig too. I can do that and savor it, but I can do the 48 ounce too. So I kind of want both. But yeah, it's amazing too. You'd go to the grocery store and you'd see, grass fed beef. Like that's a big deal. Or organic food. Like we stamp organic on food. And that shouldn't that just be called food, and the other stuff should be called?
Well, it's a shame that we have to label it separately, and then oftentimes pay more, sometimes significantly more, to get food the way we've eaten it as a species for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years.
Right, exactly.
Sad commentary.
No, it is. But food is for profit. Unfortunately,
yes,
it's for profit.
What's huge business?
Huge business. Yeah. I don't know how you get out of that, again, the end of the rainbow discussion we had earlier. But so what is the link to sugar? So this whole, with the data that I see, again, I'm a layman, so I certainly want, be relying on your opinion here, but, or your knowledge here. Sugar seems much more evil to me than all these other things we're talking about. Or at least the red meats and the fresh, seems it. So thoughts there?
Yeah. So, for the audience, general rule of thumb, stay away from doing lots of fine white powders of any substance.
Yeah.
and sugar,
well
sugar is definitely one of them. I mean, our sugar consumption is massive, and part of the problem is that it comes in these many hidden forms, right? So, you pick up a label and you see things like brown rice syrup, dextrose, maltose. Yeah, and
evaporated cane
high
juice,
fructose corn syrup, and then you see a little sugar. Then you go, well, that's not too bad. There's just a little sugar down here. These labels are by weight. Right. What they've done is tease out all the different sugars, label them individually, so they can put sugar or sucrose, at the bottom. And we just it's in everything. I mean, there are drinks that are like vegetable drinks that you think, okay, well, that's a vegetable. I'm going to get my serving as a vegetable. I'll just have a vegetable. But unless it says like 100% juice and you read the label, a lot of them we have high fructose corn syrup, sweetened bread. I don't believe they do this anymore, but not too long ago, when you went through the drive-thru to get that hamburger, the bun was loaded with sugar.
Yeah.
And the reason wasn't to give you a sweet sensation like a dessert. But as you talk about, and this was a great book by David Kessler, former head of the FDA, lots and lots of information. For my taste, it was I love this stuff. It was a little dry. You could tell it was written by a doctor. I'm kind of killing my own book sales here, but
that's right.
Sort of study after study. But what he described is the industry, and so things are crafted with an eye towards what's called a bliss point, meaning that if you eat a chip or a crisp, you want a salty crisp, right? We want a salty potato chip. But if I add a little bit of sugar as a background note, then I could put more salt on it, and it rings those reward centers in your brain even brighter. And when I combine salt and sugar, which are two sort of primeval cravings for us, With fat, then I amp the game. So it's like just cranking
Right.
the bass notes on that, so the room is shaking.
Yeah.
And so it's these combinations of
And you can't
manufactured
stop.
foods.
You open up a
No,
bag of Doritos. I mean, Cool Ranch Doritos. Forget it. I'll get out of my way. I mean,
well,
that's
it's
my
it's
favorite.
layers of sugar, salt, fat,
The
then the
texture.
textural elements
Yep.
of the crunch, and actually, then the food is made to be very soft because it turns out we don't like to chew. When we chew too much and there's too much crunch, that cues us that we need to slow down and stop eating. We're getting full. So it's a hard science with the end game of selling food and selling lots of it, and something you want to come back to time and time again. And sugar is just one of the hooks.
Yeah. I had done a podcast a while ago, and and the gentleman was basically like, I forgot what episode it was, but it was a fantastic perspective he had, and he's just like, well, the industry now with the science and the food sciences, they're hacking the system, right? Like sweet used to be back in the day, sweet used to be good because you maybe you didn't eat for 3 or 4 days. You'd find a fruit or vegetable that had some sweet to it. It was rewarding, and you wanted so much of it because your body was saying, well, there's nutrients in there. Go, go, go. Maybe 100,000 years ago, and now sweet is. But there was a process there, right? You had to maybe find it for, I don't know, 3 days. So you were doing a lot more physical activity to get that thing, or you're climbing a tree or whatever it was. But now it's just like, the rewards there at the end without any of the process to lead up to it, right? It's like you're hacking the system.
Well, I talk about this in the book I mentioned, Fallacy of the Calorie, and you're spot on. So at one time, that was kind of a survival advantage, right? So
Yes,
if I
right.
could find something sweet, and you and I are out on the Serengeti, 250,000 years ago, and Chef Dr. Mike finds this juicy apple, and now I've got available glucose in my system, and the saber-tooth tiger comes out, man, you're a little slow on
Yeah,
the draw
right,
there,
right,
Vinny.
right, right.
You didn't get
Exactly.
that. So I lived to survive another day. So something like that, something like salt, because as omnivores,
Yep.
which our ancestors were, we had to add salt to our diet. So we had to
Exactly.
seek it out like modern day chimps do. So those were survival traits, but they've been hacked and been turned into an Achilles heel
Right.
with the modern
Right.
industry.
Right.
And the health consequences, I think, speak for themselves. They're huge.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I'm looking up the episode now. It was my episode 19. Technology is hacking how we interact. And the Dr. Noam Spencer. If anyone wants to go back, listen to episode 19. Fantastic episode. I mean, it was just. I'm looking at the comments now on YouTube. It's a cesspool out there. People are crazy. But he basically summarized exactly what you just summarized, in that there's all these things are kind of hacking the reward systems. And he talked about the sugars and the fats and the salts, and there used to be a precursor to getting to that reward. And now we're just, even juices, right? Like there was no juice back in the day. There was no apple juice or orange juice. And I think, I mean, I'll let you get on waiting here, but I think generally they're healthy, but not as healthy as eating an apple. You're going to get a lot more fiber. That fructose is going to digest slower, lower blood spike. But then we're like, I'll just jam 30 apples into a glass and chug it. It's like your body's kind of like, okay, that's probably better than artificial sugar, or but still kind of a different way our bodies are meant to handle sugar. No.
Yeah, and so you hit on when you mentioned fructose. So
Yeah.
fructose is handled differently by our body when it's readily available. So sucrose is a molecule of glucose, which is kind of one of our body's go-to fuels, along with free fatty acids, and a molecule of fructose. And fructose is handled differently by the body. And when a lot of fructose is immediately available, it causes a number of changes, none of which are really good. And that's one of the issues that we have with the consequences of high fructose corn syrup. So even until the 70s, the sugar was kind of expensive to use as an ingredient. And then high fructose corn syrup came in super cheap,
Yeah.
and is super sweet. And so all of a sudden that got added to all these like soft drinks, which I
Sure.
think are one of the big banes of our society.
Yeah.
And you can make them cheaper. But now you have a lot of this, fructose immediately available, which causes the body to start to store fat. It actually shuts down, in some studies, shuts down your hunger center. So you're eating things with lots of available fructose, but your body's saying, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm
Right,
getting
right,
hungrier.
right.
And
Yeah.
so those sorts of things, and one of the things that happens is when we create those fruit juices, we disrupt the natural way in which fructose is released with all that fiber
Yeah, yeah.
that's really beneficial for us. So I'm not a big fan of fruit juices, per se. I don't drink a lot of them. I drink lots of water. Carbonated water. If you're going to drink your fruit juice, if you ferment it and get a little wine or barley and hops, that's shown to have
Oh, there
some
you go.
benefits,
Yeah.
and that's not a bad way to go either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I speak my language. Um, yeah, it's almost like if you look back when the government subsidized corn, and I don't know what year that was. That was whatever. Was that part of the agricultural revolution? I don't remember when. But then everything, you see, if you kind of trace from there on, it's like, well, okay, we don't have grass fed. You got to pay extra for grass fed. Why? They're eating corn. Why are they eating corn? Because corn is basically free, right? I mean, and then the fructose corn syrup. Everything. It's like everything's from corn. I mean, there was a documentary on Netflix.
Yes,
Gosh,
it was.
you know the name of that one? It was a while
I'm
ago.
trying to think. It was actually based off a book, I believe,
Okay.
and I read that some years ago. It was quite well done,
Yeah, yeah.
and
It's
I
really,
thought anyway, and the research seemed pretty good to me, and it just really traced back how our food, is obviously based on our agriculture, which, as you said, is derived from corn. So there's corn in everything.
yeah. Right.
Whether it's some of our fuel products,
Yeah. Ethanol.
into
Yeah.
things that we eat. And people think, oh, well, I'll have some corn on a cob, I'll have some popcorn, watch a movie, but not really realizing that corn is in so many of the
Right.
processed, and particularly what we'll maybe get to discuss is these ultra processed items. And that's where some of the real links to disability and disease that we see as a terms of a consequence of our diet manifest.
Yeah. So one article that I want to ask you about. It was, and I don't know. I read about it. I heard it on a podcast. Got 2-3 years ago. I've heard it referenced over and over again. I kind of looked into it, and I did see it on the New York Times. So I don't know if you're familiar with it or where you think if there's any foul play here. But in the because they're claiming foul play wasn't play, but
Yeah.
in the 1960s, the sugar industry paid basically paid scientists to downplay the how bad sugar was and put all the blame on saturated fat in terms of heart disease.
That's true. I go into that in my new book, Food Shaman: The Art of Quantum
Oh, you do?
Food.
Neat. Okay.
We could do a whole podcast on there. Yeah, basically what you have, and we talked about sort of the powers that be.
Yeah.
In the 50s and 60s, there were sort of two different camps. One was led by John Yudkin, who was a professor out of Great Britain, who said, what really seems to be the problem here is that there's sugar in everything, kind of what we were just talking about, and it's being added to everything, and sugar consumption is going through. And he actually wrote a book about it. In the United States, the leading proponent was Ansel Keys. And he's the father of the cholesterol saturated fat hypothesis, saying, no, the problem is saturated fat. We need to get rid of saturated fat in the diet. Yudkin's research is BS, and, went back and forth. And as you can see, in terms of, and this did actually get very political in the early 1970s. Keys was very influential. In fact, he was on the cover of Time magazine, for this. And it was in the early 70s. So we're talking, getting on 50 years now, half a century, and we talk about these things being put out that, just because they've been repeated over and over, have become kind of the gospel of food and nutrition. And that's where Keys came out and said, no, it's saturated fat. And he won the politics of the day, which is where we got the governmental recommendations that came from Hubert Humphrey's Senate subcommittee hearing. I believe it was like in 72, 73. Don't quote me on that for sure, but it was around then time that Keys published his very influential 7 countries study, so on and so forth, that, it was like, okay, case closed. And I was talking with somebody earlier today. I said, anytime anybody looks at the science, particularly when it comes to science and health and food and health, it says there's no room for discussion. The case is closed. It usually means the case
that's a
is
red
pretty
flag
open.
right
Yeah.
there. Yeah,
And so they came out and said saturated fat, and it won the politics of the day. And so half a century later, we're trying to turn the ship around.
Right. We're still telling people you can eat the yolk of an egg still to this day. Yeah, well, interesting. I'm glad I'm a little reassured that you backed that up, because I've been quoting that for years to people, saying, just eat. You can eat red meat, for God's sakes. Just eat eat a real omelet. What do you think of the food pyramid? Is it crap?
I'm glad it was dumped. I mean, you want to talk about bad things. We're talking about bread with all the additives of sugar and salt and unwanted types of fats. Most people don't realize, for example, that bread is one of the major sources of salt and sugar in the diet, because there's so much in it. Again, that subliminal background notes, but we eat a lot of it. And if you look at that food period, it was telling us to have a bowl of cornflakes more than a raw vegetable. I mean, come on, who thought that up?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean that right. Eat cereals,
The
10 servings or whatever.
industry, right?
So I'm glad that got dumped. But one of the things that we focus on in culinary medicine is really looking at food in a new way, and we've been talking about it, kind of dancing around it a little bit. In our conversation here, where we're talking about where there's red meat and there's red meat, it's how it's raised, etc. And this again was published, I think, the first paper I think came out roughly around a decade ago too, out of the University of Sao Paulo, I believe, from Brazil. And it's called the NOVA classification, Nova, for anybody who wants to look that up. Actually, you can find it if you just do that and type in the United Nations, because this classification system has been adopted by the United Nations and many other countries worldwide. But fascinating to me that when I talk to colleagues, meaning physicians, nutritionists, healthcare professionals, certainly chefs as well in this country, very few people have heard of it. What they did is they looked at food and said, just like Mike and Vinny are talking right now, this idea of red meat or fresh vegetables, broccoli or fruit, it doesn't make sense, right? Because you could say apple, but do you mean apple juice?
Right.
Do you mean, an apple fizzy? Do you mean eat an apple?
I had a salad today. What does that mean? Did you have some
what
lettuce
kind
and
of dressing
vegetables with a piece of salmon on it, or do you have, ranch dressing, croutons, bacon bits?
Yeah.
I mean, what does it mean?
Do you have the lettuce doing the backstroke?
Exactly.
In some ranch dressing,
Right.
And so they said, it just doesn't really make sense. So let's look at food, and they divided it into 4 classifications. The one that's important is what they call a level 4 or 4 classification, meaning it's ultra processed food. Now, to give you an idea, depending on the studies and things you read, that's somewhere around 60 to 70% of what the average American eats. So we're not talking that in the modern Western diet, or as we call it, the S.A.D, standard American diet, we eat a little ultra processed food. That far away is the majority of what we eat. And they've just shown really good data showing correlation between how much of that you eat and your level of disability and disease in terms of obesity. And by obesity, I don't mean that people are just overweight. I mean the detrimental inflammatory, system-wide, body-wide inflammation that is true obesity truly correlates with increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, certain types of cancers, arthritis, the list goes on and on. I want to stress, because somebody will say, hey, wait, Chef Dr. Mike, correlation's not causation. Correct. But that is a good place to start. And there actually is some information coming out, because when we look at societies in which they don't have access to those ultra processed foods, so certain what we might call more I technologically challenged folks. I don't like the term primitive peoples, but more of the hunter gatherers, people who don't have access necessarily to those foods. We don't see the disease that we see as a consequence of our diet. And one quick example, this I believe was part of the MESA study, MESA, which looked at the risk of developing cardiovascular disease by looking at how much calcium is in the arteries of folks as we get older, and the more calcium in there, that does what's called a calcium score, can correlate to your risk of having heart disease. So that's a kind of way we can look and we study without having to go in and take pictures of the heart artery. So what we call a non-invasive way. And we generally assumed that as you got older, it was inevitable you'd have, more calcium as part of the aging process. Yet, again, I think this was done in Brazil, but it was definitely a South American tribe that they did these scans on. And to give you an idea, I believe roughly, if you take the average sort of 50-ish year old male, significant disease is found in about 60% of people, if you just, randomly screen folks. It was something like, I think, 3 to 6% in this tribe.
Wow.
So what they took away from that is that, and obviously they're also very physically active.
Yep.
All their food, the bulk is far and away fresh, unprocessed. They do eat meats, game meats, lots of fish from the Amazon basin, as well as lots of plants and a diet rich in a variety of plants as well. But what it shows us is that, wow, this isn't necessarily inevitable as a part of aging. Maybe it's a reflection of lifestyle, particularly what we choose to eat.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it just seems, I don't know, maybe, I'm always worried about confirmation bias. I talk to folks like you a lot because it just seems to be where the data is going. So I do probably need to talk to other folks that have the opposing opinion, but I just see it full of holes. But again, confirmation bias. Sometimes you hear what you're reinforcing what I was already thinking, but you're also quoting data, and you're also an MD. That looks so. I think there is some. I don't like when folks just disqualify that because you listen to the same old folks, but they're also very qualified to make these assertions.
Well,
so
I'd invite anybody to pick up a copy of Food Shaman, which is the latest book. Fallacy of the Calorie is a little older, but similar information. And just look at the references. So I had an issue with my publisher because they're like, Mike, come on, you're costing us, X amount of money because you have 40 pages of references here. And I was like, listen, if I'm a cardiologist and I'm telling somebody they can have a steak, I define exactly what those criteria are, I better have the data, to show them. And so, there are footnotes and the references are there. I don't like somebody giving me opinion and saying, well, as you said, that's just bunk. Okay, maybe it is, but tell me why. Let me hear your thoughts. Let me hear the science. Do you have some supporting or corroborating evidence? And so the evidence is there. You can look up the study and then make up your own mind. Right. And you could say, Dr. Mike, Chef Dr. Mike, that's crazy, man. I do not believe that. And you can read the study and say, wow, yeah, you're right. Or, I disagree with what you took away from that. Because I've seen that abused too. I've seen where people quote studies, and when I've actually looked up their reference, I'm like, wait, that's not what this study says. As you said, it was sort of, they read a headline that confirmed what they wanted to say, but the study actually said something else. So it's all there. And the same thing in our course, at the end of each lecture, there's a list of references, there's papers, and I ask the students, you're going to get an A if you disagree with me and you agree with me. As long as you could support your thought process. It's about getting people to think again, Vinny, instead of just these 140 character sound bites.
How dare you, sir?
And we adopt it like a religion, and then there's no arguing with it because it becomes something of faith, something personal. Then we get all the ad hominem attacks, of which I've received. I received some more the other day. Chef Dr. Mike's full of bunk. He's flat out wrong. The Pure trial never talked about fruits and vegetables. It was saturated fat and cardiac disease. I was like, yes, that was the first paper, but I actually sent them my copy with my highlighted notes saying, here's the Pure study on vegetables. And then what I got back was, well, the other studies you're talking about are bunk. I was like, okay, Stanford, University of Washington, University of Florida, peer-reviewed journals. That's your opinion. You're totally entitled to it. But let's be honest. Let's be intellectually honest about it.
Well, no one wants to have a conversation anymore. You're right. A conversation like this takes an hour plus, and we're now if we were debating, it would be an hour plus of discussion. But we're not debating. But yeah, it's the 140 character, whatever it is now, whatever Twitter does, and it's typed. Go. I'm anonymous. I'll say whatever I want. Throw bombs. Quote one thing. Find whatever I'm looking for online. And by the way, when you type what you're looking for online, you'll find what you're looking for. People don't even understand that sometimes, and it's like, how about we have a conversation, right? People always like, well, why did you start the podcast? Because to to encourage me to think more and get with folks that like to think and have an hour plus conversation every few weeks to think. That's it.
Yeah,
God forbid.
and I can tell you, and I'll be honest. My opinion on certain things has evolved as the data has evolved.
Yeah.
So
As it
years
should, yeah.
ago, I was like, oh wow, I think maybe these plant-based margarines, as we were talking,
Yeah, right.
maybe they're better than. I mean, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, Vinny, I was telling patients all the same things, that the mainstream cardiologists were telling them, until I sort of had it hit home with me. And then I had to do my own research and, rediscover my own roots and said, well, wait a second. When I'm telling people, maybe that's not right. And that's a hard conversation to have with yourself.
It is.
And to go back and
yeah.
say, like, hey, what I said about butter. And I looked up and I was like, and I searched the literature, and this blew me away. I could not find one study that compared butter to margarine in a head-to-head comparison to health outcomes. All the data was extrapolated because butter had saturated fat from what we talked about earlier.
Right.
And in fact, looking at the data, people who ate butter on a regular basis, I'll own up to that now, organic butter, reduces your risk of developing diabetes by like 4%. So the butyric acid, which is where butter comes from, right? That's one of the big signaling molecules of a healthy gut bacteria. Is the butyric acid is a signal short chain fatty acids. So butter has antimicrobial properties as well in the age of COVID. So all these things, but it was a soundbite, and I was guilty of it as well. And I would say, show me the data. I'm gonna keep an open mind. That's how science moves ahead. What I love is that weird thing that's outlying in this quadrant, and it's like, well, that's real, but that's strange. To me, it's like a plate of like, wow, I would have never thought to pair, this with limes.
Right.
That's crazy. But I got to try it. I got to go investigate that. And holy cow, this is absolutely delicious.
Yeah. Well, you haven't built a platform on, research and publishing, a lot of these folks, like maybe they reached that impasse that you reached about the butter and the margarine thing, and a lot of folks, a lot of scientists, a lot of doctors double down on what they've been preaching all these years because they don't want to call themselves out. It's not intellectually honest, and it's selfish, but I understand that position. It's not an easy, they've maybe built a career on position X, and now the data is overwhelmingly disproving X. What do? They double down on X. It's unfortunate.
Well, that's what and I'll say it. I'm a member. I love a lot of the work they've done. I've been a keynote speaker for the American Heart Association, but I'll call them out when I need to call them out, right? And they're the ones who came down and said, well, yeah, we see this data on egg yolks, but then it was like, well, we still don't think you should eat them. And then I think their last back step, because the data really is overwhelming now, as we're talking, where it's like, well, a few eggs, can be part of a healthy diet. We guess it's okay if you have to. But again, that's, that I have a problem with that because they built these positions. And then, as I say, anyone who can't tell you that they were wrong, I don't trust them.
Right.
I'll tell you as a chef, I put these dishes out there. They look great. They taste great. But I've screwed up in the kitchen more times than, anyone can imagine. And if you look at the history of food and medicine, it's just chock full of errors and retractions and confusions for all these reasons. And we need to start having real conversations about it. And that's why even talking about a category like red meat, and I think we pretty much nailed this on your podcast because of great direction by you, because I'm like sometimes over here and over there and everywhere. But right, we can't talk about red meat. We've got to talk about, is it fresh? And if it's fresh, is it, how is that raised? Is it a heritage breed? Heritage breeds, oftentimes the types of fats and fat distribution is different. So people talk about Kobe beef or Wagyu beef, right? So they have a different type of genetic basis for fat deposition and types of fats. Certain breeds of heritage pork. It's fascinating because as a chef, I realized as I was working, I volunteered to go help a butcher, one night, so I could learn to do some pork butchery and do my own, and then
Yeah.
save me money and learn some stuff. So I was working with Abe, and he had these incredibly. I mean, they were raised, on the farm, in the fields, just doing what like happy pigs like to do, and just eating stuff.
Yep.
But when I was working, the pork fat was melting in my hands because of my body temperature.
Oh my gosh.
Now, if you go to the store
Right.
and you buy, some pork spare ribs or some pork, and you work with home, that layer of white stays solid at room temperature.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
But working with these, it was like working with duck and duck fat, foie gras, I should say. One of the main components of foie gras is oleic acid, which is what you find in olive oil,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons it starts to melt like at room temperature.
Yeah.
So there's so many
Starving
layers
right
there.
now,
I mean,
Mike.
that's
Killing
why I
me.
love it, man. It's like a
I
good
know,
meal.
I know. You're killing me. I'm starving. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Now I do want to touch on one thing. I wasn't planning on it, but you keep mentioning the calorie fallacy. Your book,
The Fallacy of the Calorie.
Fallacy of the
right?
Calorie.
That's one
So
book.
this is always boggles my mind, and I'd love to. I got to get your take on it. So conservation of energy. Right. It's. We all know if you eat less and move more, that's you're gonna make progress. And obviously there's ways you can regress, but what is your? So I think I'm going to assume by the title of your book, it's not all about calories, or maybe calories don't matter at all. I don't know. I'll let you speak to that, but it's something that's been, the debate's been there forever. You hear hormones, not calories, calories in, calories out, the type of calorie, the again, it's still, and I go again. I'm an engineer. It goes back to like physics. Energy is not created or destroyed. It comes in. It's got to go somewhere. So it starts to hurt my head. So summarize what your thoughts are on calories.
So you're gonna love this because we'll end with an engineering type story.
Cool.
This
All
will
right.
be right up your alley.
It's like we rehearsed this.
So the calorie came about because of engineers, not food. So it was the Industrial Revolution and a steam engine, and that's a genesis of a calorie. So I had to work on a way to power my steam engine most efficiently as a machine. Mechanical efficiency. You get that? You're an engineer. And so most people think of a calorie in terms of energy. Oh, it's the energy. It's not, right? A calorie is actually the amount of heat generated in the process of raising a kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius at what we would call sea level or 0 atmospheres, or 1 atmosphere, I should say. So it was developed as a measure of heat. You can convert, it's 4.2, 1 calorie equals 4.2 kilojoules, and joules are actually the energy of measurement of energy, and there's the transfer. So that should tell us something about the story right away, right? That it's not measuring energy, it's measuring heat produced. Now, how do we get a calorie? So in the it's late 1700s, early 1800s, they developed something called a bomb calorimeter. So I take that apple that we had, that we're going to press later, make apple juice, and I put it in this device, and I basically blow it up. I incinerate it. So there's nothing left but ash. And then I look and say, how much did my water heat up? And that's how many calories are in that particular apple. Now, most everyone, I think, will agree. One of the few things we can agree on, unless you are Mephistopheles or Sauron the Great, nobody metabolizes an apple like that. Right? We eat it, we chew it.
Right.
There's what's called an efficiency of extraction. Did you cook it? Because then you can take more energy out of it if it's been cooked or processed or treated, etc. So this idea that somehow calorie amounts equate with health became conflated. The idea behind that was developed by somebody named Wilbur Atwater. And we still use his name today because you can go to the government and look up in the Atwater Index the caloric values of different foods that the government keeps. Well, Wilbur Atwater said, it's the Industrial Revolution, but we still have a lot of things that are done by human and animal labor, right? People were still using, horses and things to plow their fields and whatnot. So what things contain a lot of calories that we can feed people and animals so they can do work for us? That was the original purpose of a calorie, to find food that was calorically dense so you could feed it to people cheaply and they could do work.
Right.
Had nothing to do with health.
Right.
and yet over the years it's become conflated to be, if it has less calories, it's better for you, et cetera, et cetera. And long story short is that because of all these things like the gut microbiome that we've only really learned about in the last 10 years, the processing, epigenetics, our own nutrigenomics, in which our each of us are individual on how we react to foods and its components, and the very fact that there are food components, not just calories, that determine health. To me, the conversation of calories is irrelevant. And I'll end maybe with one last study, for example, that looked at a Mediterranean diet, so eating things very fresh, what I call a Mediterranean approach, unrestricted in terms of calories. You could eat as much as you wanted. Folks were healthier by all measures, actually lost weight compared to a low-fat, American recommended diet, caloric restriction. People were just miserable and didn't really lose the weight. And 95% of these caloric restriction diets, after 5 years, people have either gained it back or gained back more weight for a number of other reasons.
Right. Now I'll push back a little and tell me where I'm off here, but generally speaking, so it certainly isn't the entire story. Roger, 100% agree with that. Now, but a person eating 2,000 calories a day for 6 months are going to have a certain amount of exactly the same behavior, exercise routine, health, stress, everything. And then 6 months, and then for another 6 months, they double their calories. They're going to be fatter, correct?
At the end of the day, in a very gross way, you could kind of look at that, and I would agree with that. It's particularly true at the extremes. So if we take in massive amounts of calories each day, we're going to put on weight. At the other extreme, if we calorically restrict ourselves, so at the margins, we're going to lose weight, regardless of whether it's low fat, low carb, whatever. But there was one study done, and forgive me, I'm blanking on it, but it actually is in the book, where they looked at this and said, let's in one diet restrict fat, one diet restrict protein, one diet restrict carbs, and look at different measures of how that affects the body and the immune system. And it turned out they all had different effects. So even within the sort of this realm of caloric restriction, what you restrict has significant impact. So I kind of look at calories like miles per gallon in your car, right? Like you go there and they're like, you're going to get 50 miles per gallon of this. And it's like, well, if Mike's driving it in Montana back roads, which are dirt and full of potholes, and Mike didn't check his tire pressure, and I haven't tuned my engine, and I haven't changed my oil in 2 years, I may not get the recommended miles per gallon. Vinny's very meticulous. He's an engineer. He knows all about this stuff. He checks his tire pressure every day. Everything's perfect. Vinny's actually getting 70 miles a gallon. So, it gives you a ballpark, I think. But with that being said, again, 6 months down the road, your body's changed. Yeah. Right? You're 6 months older. So caloric needs and things are different. I just find that it's not a useful guide in terms of food, going by calories. What's much more useful to me is the adoption of the NOVA classification and looking at foods and meals in terms of, are they ultra processed or are they real and wholesome? And if you do that, then you can go by the delicious factor. Like, this sucks and it's not delicious and I don't want to eat it, versus this is absolutely delicious, I'll take more of that.
Well, I'll back you up here with a personal experiment my wife and I just did. I mean, we're generally people that are interested in health and fitness. We've always have been. We enjoy exercising and we enjoy food. So we try to be good, quote unquote, and then we kind of go crazy here and there on the weekends and whatnot. But we just did recently a whole 30 for the month of March, right? And I don't think it's a fad diet at all. I would look at it and go, well, okay, it's a 30-day thing. They have a whole program wrapped around it. But the only rules are basically don't eat any processed crap. And there's no calorie counting. There's no limit to what you ate. My wife and I ate we ate all the right foods, but we ate as much as we wanted. And we were full. We were never hungry. A lot of healthy fats, a lot of fats. So if I added the calories up, I probably consume more well, it gets a little hairy because I wasn't drinking alcohol, cut all the pizza on the weekend. So there might have been a calorie, might have been a push and pull there. But generally speaking, I was never hungry. I ate whatever I wanted, as long as it didn't have the crap in the ingredients. And we both lost significant weight, and didn't really lose performance. You're still able to work out, muscle mass. It wasn't. It lost the weight you want to lose. So there's like once again, there's something to what you're saying. I mean, it just it's there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and that's what it's about, and part of that too, right, is that to get back to what I talked about, this mindfulness, how you feel.
Yeah.
If you feel hungry, what's that? There's that commercial, I think it's maybe Snickers, right? Hangry.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, right. And so
Yeah,
if you're feeling like that and you're feeling stressed and miserable because you're hungry, you're feeling deprived, that has negative impacts in our health. We know that now.
Yeah.
So if we're going to eat, let us be happy about it. Let us partake. Let food be a source of joy. Too often, I find from the medical community, we want to dictate to people, this is the diet, this is what you need to find, cut this out, cut that out, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
And we make food work.
Yeah.
And food and the food experience for human beings has never been about work. In our DNA, food is social currency. Food is tied to the mating ritual. Food is all about Mike and Vinny's, great, ancestors sitting around a fire, and one of us, saying, "Hey, how about some ribs?"
Right,
And
right.
then we start telling stories, and we become social primates, and so to take that out of the equation
Right.
is, what one thing I say in our class is you can't take the diner out of dinner.
Yeah,
Then
I
you're
like
just
that.
left with N, which is like,
Yeah.
so and it makes no sense.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but
No, I
but you
like
get
that.
the
Yeah.
the gist of the saying there.
No, it's true. If you just look at it, I mean, we have to wrap up here in a second. I apologize. We didn't get to. We didn't. I mean, we got to do this again because I do want to get to some of the other
Yeah,
stuff. But
absolutely.
this has been a blast, man. And I could talk about this stuff forever. And I just think there's some basic tenets when you look at all this stuff. You can take a step back, and you need to see kind of the forest through the trees. Sometimes it's like, okay, look at things you're eating. Did this thing exist 10,000 years ago? No. 1,000 years ago? No. 100 years ago? No. And then you get to, you kind of, okay, that should be a red flag, right? Does it come in a box? Should be a red flag. Does it have a label that's this long? We all agree we existed 100,000 years. Well, I guess not everyone, but won't get into that. We have biomechanical processes and that have evolved to do certain things. And you just know, Mike, I'm going back to the whole 30 thing. I mean, my wife and I, we were sleeping. When I tell you the sleep, you could, I mean, if she was in there, she'd tell you, I would wake up in the morning like, oh my God, that was just the best night's sleep. I mean, because we weren't eating late, weren't eating crap at night, and it was just, so there's a bunch of things, and just eating wholesome foods, again, as much as we wanted, really, and just till we stopped, and the sleep was miraculous. It was just, I'm like, oh, that's what sleep is supposed to be like, so.
And one of the biggest risk factors in terms of developing obesity is sleep deprivation.
Yeah. That's like that. Yeah, it's this evil cycle.
And as you mentioned at the outset, and follow the rainbow, right?
Yeah.
And there's just a lot. It's big business. There's Kraft isn't going to, macaroni and cheese isn't going to get out and support what Chef Dr. Mike has to say. Domino's Pizza ain't sponsoring me to get on Food Network and show people how to cook. It's all I can do is thank people like you for helping me to get the word out. And as you say, I just want to share what I have. Take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I'm offering you the meal. Give it a taste. If it's something that speaks to you, you want to know more, learn more, maybe adopt things like you talked about. Well, gosh, I'll try it, and gosh darn it, I feel good.
Right. Yeah.
And this is the way I want to live my life. And somebody else says, to hell with it. I love going through the drive-through every day, and this is how I want to live my life.
Right.
That's a great thing. It's your choice.
Right.
But as long as people have the information,
Yep.
what bothers me is when it's misinformation that's propagated, or things are not discussed honestly, or for a lot of people, Vinny, and you talk about folks. I had a 28-year-old. I had to do an emergent case on some years ago. It's one of the things that really spurred me to develop the culinary medicine course at the university. And I went in and talked with her the next morning. It was a Saturday, Friday night she came in. 28 years old. I had to put a stent in her artery. And, we were talking about food. And she just looked at me. She said, Doc, I'm trying. She said, but honestly, it's like eat eggs, don't eat eggs, all the things we talked about. She said, I just got so confused.
Exactly, yeah.
I just did what was easy, and that's go through the drive-thru. And then, this is the kicker, Minnie. Then her lunch comes in while I'm sitting there. And what's on her hospital tray? Refined white bread, a slice of processed American-like cheese food, a deli meat,
Right.
green Jello, because you have to have that while you're in the hospital, a salad that looked like, I could have taken those cherry tomatoes and played ping pong balls with them.
White,
And
no
then
green. Yeah.
a big tube of, this, highly processed vegetable oil dressing thing,
Yeah.
and then a bunch of crappy condiments, including, processed mayonnaise.
Yeah.
And there it is, literally
Yeah.
on a plate.
Yeah. Served by the hospital that's employing you.
By the
That you
hospital.
represent. And, yeah.
So when she leaves, she said, well, what did I eat in the hospital? Because they must have given
They
me
must
the
know
best
what-
thing for me.
It's
Right? Because that's the hospital. They know
irony. Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. Yeah.
the irony
Yeah.
of it all. Oh, the sadness.
Crazy. Well. Again, hopefully people, people can, like you said earlier, it's their own relationship with food. It's their own experience. They'll hopefully take information like this and make their choices. I mean, that's what it's all about. So Mike, let's wrap this up. Where can folks find you, and what do you got going on? You got a couple books, you said. What?
So if they just pop on the web, go to www.chefdrmike, that's chefdrmike.com. Everything you need to know is there. There's links to the books. They're available on Amazon. There's descriptions of our course that I teach at the university. It's 100% online, so we're offering that now to the public.
Oh, cool.
So folks can actually get a level 1 certification from the University of Montana College of Health in culinary medicine.
Oh, neat.
If that's
Wow.
something that may help personal trainers, chefs, hopefully healthcare professionals, they want to incorporate that into their practice and their relationship with patients. They can read about me, get some recipes, or follow me on social media and just drop me a line.
Awesome.
May take me a day or two, depending on how call goes.
Yeah.
But I'm just a simple, one man guy, so I answer all of those personally myself.
Cool. Well, very cool. Well, Chef Dr. Mike, thanks for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, man.